A declining superpower is always dangerous. We are living through very turbulent times. The West is still very powerful, of course, hegemonic, but it is a declining force. It behaves as though it's born to lead. Huh? Yeah, they want to dictate. They don't want to really have a dialogue. So it's double standards all the time. The BRICS would never have been created, I can tell you that, if we had not sensed the fact that the West was unwilling to have a true dialogue with us. The current international monetary and financial system, dominated by the United States and its allies, it's unreformable. The system is rigid. It's rigidly controlled. It has become, when I say the system, I mean the IMF, the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, the dollar itself, the SWIFT payment system. All this has become a set of geopolitical instruments that the West uses routinely and aggressively to intimidate, restrict, and dominate other countries. So this is my experience in the fund. I fought a lot to reform the fund. I spent years and years doing that, and we did achieve some things in the context of what you just mentioned, the financial crisis, when the West was weak. It sort of made some concessions. But since 2010, since 14 years, the whole structure of the fund has been frozen. This is, I believe, a symptom of the decay of the West. The West is still very powerful, of course, hegemonic, but it is a declining force. And the declining force misuses the instruments it has. I always say that if we want to change things, we have at least one important ally. If we want to change the dollar system, this important ally is the United States, because it continuously undermines its own currency, misusing it.
Yeah, a lot of people are joking about it, but it undermines it in a very sort of unconscious way. I mean, doing a lot of damage, but the big question is whether there's any good to anyone coming from that, including the United States itself. And when there is no good, when the power is, destroying for the sake of destroying, that's pretty dangerous, isn't it?
A declining superpower is always dangerous, especially if this declining superpower, the United States, has a mindset, deeply ingrained mindset, that it has to be the leader, that it has to give orders, that it has to be the dominant player in the game.
There's a big difference between being a leader and giving orders, by the way. I mean, it's
in fact,
not the same thing, right?
The U.S. is a self-proclaimed leader. Nobody asked them to play that role, at least not the major countries. Huh? But it has played that role since World War II. And it has been facing, I think it's quite clear that it has been facing increasing difficulties in sustaining that superpower. No? So we are living through very turbulent times. Witness what is going on in Ukraine, what is going on in the Middle East. These are symptoms of the aggressive power of destruction, of a superpower that is in decline and fears its decline. My Indian colleague in the executive board used to say that the International Monetary Fund is a misnomer. It should be named the North Atlantic Monetary Fund, because really it's an alliance between the US and its European allies that governs the fund. As the same holds for the World Bank. We used to hope, some of us used to hope, that over time the US and Europe would be open to change, would come to realize that the institutions they created and control would only be viable if it becomes a more participatory structure. But what I saw there is a deep resentment, a deep resistance to any fundamental change. We can make some changes in the fund, only to the extent that these changes do not challenge the control, the centralization of decision-making in the small committee, which used to call itself the international community. It's, as you say, 15% or less of the total population of the world, and it behaves as though it's born to lead. Huh? It used to do it easily in the last centuries, but now this time is gone. The time has passed, and the Europeans, and especially the Americans, do not want to recognize this. They want to hold on to their power, to their privileges.
Well, to the title of power, but I get the sense that they don't actually want to be sort of burdened with the actual work of leading and governing, because it takes a lot of time and effort, as far as I understand.
Yeah, they want to dictate. They don't want to really have a dialogue. It's a dialogue it's a pseudo-dialogue in reality, what you see in the international organizations. They're no longer multilateral, except in name. They become tools. So it's double standards all the time. The BRICS would never have been created, I can tell you that, if we had not sensed the fact that the West was unwilling to have a true dialogue with us. I believe development in the current circumstance needs to be independent from Western structures, because Western structures have shown, you quoted two stark examples, Syria and Libya, but there are many others. What does this show? That you cannot develop if you don't have your own independent means, economic but also military. What is Russia showing? Russia is showing that the West cannot defeat it militarily.
But Russia is huge. I mean, Russia is a large country.
So large countries like Russia, China, Brazil, India can play a role in building, let's say, an umbrella where countries can develop peacefully and protected from the sort of destructive impulses that the West has, especially the United States. It's something to be investigated more deeply, why the US behaves in that way. Look at what's happening in French-speaking Africa. A lot of countries are rebelling, expelling French forces, questioning French models of international relations. And I can tell you, from my experience, the French-speaking African countries used to be very disciplined with respect to France. Very, very much satellites. And now, 15 years later, I see the movement that's going on. In Africa, in Latin America, it's a mixed bag, but you have the same situation. In Asia, the East Asian countries are developing at a very fast pace. Look at what, not only China, but Southeast Asia, they did not follow the neoliberal agenda. They never followed it. Now, of course, you may say, well, Donald Trump is an outlier in terms of bluffs and aggressive statements, but I think we should make no mistake, the United States elite is deeply hostile to any attempt to unseat the dollar. A system based purely on national currencies is a good step, yes, but it's not sufficient. So we need a reference currency. The United States has power to influence backstage and front stage countries that may seek an alternative to the dollar. So you need to muster political will and technical capacity. My concern is that if we stick to consensus rigidly with an expanding group, we may not get anywhere.